If you're a software engineer, you've been there. You're finally relaxing after a long day and you get paged. Something's broken. Are the servers down? Is the database slow? Is there a bug in the latest deployment? Now the whole team is panicked, going from tool to tool and person to person to troubleshoot the problem. That won't happen if you get New Relic. New Relic brings together 16 monitoring tools so teams can see across the entire stack from one place. More importantly, with New Relic, you can pinpoint problems down to the line of code to fix problems more quickly. That's why more than 14,000 companies, including DoorDash, GitHub, and Epic Games, use New Relic to debug and improve their software. The next late night call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does. You can get the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigs of data free forever. No credit card required. Just visit newrelic.com/cloudcast. That's newrelic.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as I record Cloud News of the Week this week, it is the beginning of June. It is hard to believe that we are almost to summer here in the United States. That is amazing to me. I hope everyone is staying safe out there. There's lots of conferences and folks starting to travel, and there's been, to put it mildly, mixed reviews on the travel experience as well as catching COVID. So please, everyone, stay safe and take care of your families. For Cloud News, it's a pretty short news list this week. First one we've actually talked about last week, and that is Broadcom acquiring VMware. It is official. The amount went for about $61 billion in cash and stock, as well as absorbing $8 to $9 billion. I don't remember the exact number in debt. So let's just call it $70 billion. That is quite a premium. And the reviews for this throughout the community and by folks we know has been, I'll just say, mixed at best. Some folks are in favor of it, but I do think there is a number of folks that are just wondering exactly where it is going to go from here. There is a really good article by Brian Madden. If you're familiar with Brian Madden, go take a look at that. It's a very honest review of what he thinks as a longtime VMware employee. And with that, I'm going to move on to our second article. The second one actually is an acquisition. We talked about Docker and Docker kind of righting the ship and turning things around. Well, they did an acquisition. They bought Tilt, and Tilt is going to be joining Docker. So what is Tilt? Well, it is a dev environment, specifically dev environment as code, specifically for Kubernetes. And they very early on built in Docker integrations back in the Docker Swarm days. And so they had a really good environment specifically for Docker or optimized for Docker. And so it made sense to make this acquisition happen. So now there is an integrated platform, or will be an integrated platform going forward. For our last article, we've talked many times about DevRel careers on the show and talked to folks. But there is an article, Cloudcast alumni, but it's over, the link is over at DX Tips, all about what does the hiring process look like, or what should it look like, especially if you're maybe an early stage startup and maybe you're hiring for that first developer. Is it a early engineer, so very engineering focused, or is it more somebody with a DevRel background that is coming in to build those frameworks as well? Longtime listeners to the podcast, it goes back to the classic, are you looking for a pioneer? Are you looking for a settler? And what kind of soft skills as well as technical skills to look for? How should the interview process go? How to create the job description? And how does the entire hiring process exist from start to finish? So go take a look at that. If it is something that you're either looking to go through this process, or somebody who may take advantage of this. It is definitely a very good read. So with that, I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Coming up after the break, we have Andy Grotto, and we're going to be talking about cybersecurity in 2022.
Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And folks, today we're going to do something a little bit different. Obviously, we're gonna stay in the domain of technology, which we always do. But a lot of times, as many of you know who listen to the show quite a bit, our guests are folks who are starting companies, are CTOs of companies, are people who are living, for the most part, typically in the technology domain. They work at a company that sells technology. They work at a cloud provider. But sometimes, especially, as a lot of you do day in, day out, you pay attention to what else is going on in the rest of the world, whether it's how technology impacts your life, how government change impacts technology, how the economy is impacting buying and selling and funding and all those sort of things. So things that we talk about a little bit, but don't always really dive into. And today we have sort of a unique opportunity, especially ahead of the RSA conference, which will be coming out next week if you're listening to this when this comes out. But we get a chance to talk to some folks who I think take a broader picture of this and have really, really impressive backgrounds, maybe the most impressive backgrounds we've ever had on the show. So really excited to have both Andy Grotto, who from Stanford University, and Steve Weber from UC Berkeley. Guys, welcome to the show. Great to have you both on.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Andy, I'm going to let you go first, and then Steve, I'll ask you to follow him. Give us a little bit of your background, because you guys have some really impressive backgrounds. Obviously, you teach at university, you do research today at university, but really impressive backgrounds in terms of worldviews, working with governments from around the world, economic groups from around the world. Give us a little bit of your background, Andy. Why don't you go first? It'll also help folks to kind of recognize your voice as we go through the day.
Sounds good, Brian. So I lead a research and teaching program at Stanford on geopolitics, technology, and governance, and also lead our cyber policy specialization that we offer through our 2-year master's degree in international policy studies. Before coming to Stanford, I spent many years in and around the U.S. federal government in Washington, D.C., most recently as the Senior Director for Cyber Policy in the National Security Council at the White House. I am a cyber nerd through and through. Yeah,
and you have an impressive accomplishment of having worked for both a Republican and a Democratic presidential administration. So it means folks respect you on both sides of the aisle.
I hope so.
Steve, what about you?
Yeah, well, I can first confirm that Andy is indeed a cyber nerd, and I can't compete with him on that score. But I'm close. I sort of have a dual career in academia and consulting. I spent 32 years actually as a professor at UC Berkeley, first in political science and then at the School of Information. It's kind of an interdisciplinary computer science department. I got connected to the technology world really in the late 1990s when I became fully obsessed with the open source software community, and sort of found my way into the technology world through that lens. I'm still a big fan of the open source world. I follow it really closely, but naturally over time sort of transitioned to thinking a lot more about the way in which business models, economics, intellectual property, and technology come together to make this thing called digital transformation that we all live in and through. So really excited to be spending this time talking with you guys about it.
Yeah, good stuff. I want to start with something that you guys probably don't teach down at the 101 level, but your backgrounds and what you focus on is sort of this intersection of technology. We'll call it sort of security focused today, but government policy, global economics. If you were speaking to somebody, so a freshman walks into Berkeley or Stanford today, and they go, "Okay, those are huge things. I'm a technology nerd like everybody listening. How do I start thinking about how technology impacts government thinking and the economy, and how the other two, like, how do you walk somebody through or give them a frame of reference for how those big three topics all kind of have a push and pull with each other?"
I'll get started with that, Brian, then turn it to Andy. It's sort of interesting, given the timing of where we are, I might say, look, why don't you head across the bay from Berkeley over to San Francisco and go just kind of walk around the RSA conference and listen to what people are talking about.
Yeah.
And the proportions of the things. So, they'll be there's a bunch of technology people first and foremost, and they'll be talking about technology, but what they'll be spending most of their time actually talking about is sort of where the technology meets human beings, where it meets society, where it meets business models, and the importance of getting that intersection right. I mean, it's kind of a almost like conventional wisdom now, but that doesn't mean it's wrong to say that security is almost never purely a technology problem, and it will almost never purely be a technology solution. So although technology has to lead in that whole conversation, thinking that you can kind of unlock this golden fleece with some kind of code solution or some kind of hardware or some kind of new product can at best be part of the answer. And I think Andy will probably agree with me on that, but I have a lot more to say about the government piece of how that moves.
Yeah, no, I think Steve is absolutely right. There's a metaphor that I like to use, and it involves potato. A hot potato, a steaming, fresh hot potato from the oven. The game Hot Potato, where music starts and people try to get rid of that hot potato before the music stops. You can think about risk, any risk, but especially cyber risk, as a hot potato. And much of what the RSA conference is about is sort of like who's left holding that hot potato when the music starts. To pick up on Steve's point about much of security being about people and technology, not just technology. Incentives matter a ton when it comes to who's left holding that hot potato.
Right.
If an organization can rig the game so that someone else is holding the hot potato that they baked, right? That's a win for them, right? They have relatively little incentive then if they're able to pass that hot potato off to someone else to invest in oven mitts, just to torture the metaphor a little bit here.
Yeah, no, I think actually, now that I think about it, and I don't know that I'd ever kind of put it in that frame of reference, of all the technologies we talk about, and we talk about people using cloud computing or writing applications a certain way, those to a certain extent can kind of live in a technology vacuum. But when I think about the folks that we interact with that focus on security, I think you're right. They, more than anybody else, have to have, a little bit of politics in the back of their mind. They have to have a little bit of economics in the back of their mind, because again, they're dealing with risk, bank accounts getting emptied out, credit cards getting emptied out, something getting hacked and starting a war because, this led to this. And I think it makes sense that, security has to have a broader perspective on what they do versus just being like, do I lock something? Do I unlock something? Do I encrypt something? Do I unencrypt something?
Yeah. Brian, it's a really, really interesting point. I've often thought of the best CISOs I've met as having, and I'm sure many of your listeners have, really quite eclectic backgrounds.
Yeah.
They all understand technology, and some of them come from having been, hardcore code writers and all that kind of stuff. But they sort of evolve in ways that are a little bit more like a modern product manager who actually has to have the kind of overall view of being able to bring those pieces together and then sort of manage a really complicated technology-human interface. So I often think of really great CISOs as kind of really great security product managers.
Yeah.
With a technology bent, but with a very sort of general integrative mindset that can see everywhere from Andy's incentives to the individual who chooses to click through a dialog box just because it's easier.
Right. Now, as we mentioned in the introductions, you guys have, not only done a lot of individual work that's been well recognized, but you've worked with large organizations, whether they're government entities or business entities. How do you think about framing a conversation about these intersections, these sort of difficult issues? Because the reason I say that is because a lot of times, you'd be talking to somebody and you're saying, look, we need to do this better, or, these are the ramifications of kind of where we are. And oftentimes people are like, yeah, but what can I do? Right? Like sometimes you have a tendency to kind of compartmentalize it. Like, what can I do? How do you present an argument or present a framework for somebody so it doesn't completely freak them out, but at the same time, like you give them actionable things that they can do? If you're trying to set government policy or you're trying to set economic policy where technology is in the middle of that, like how do you frame that conversation? What tends to work? What doesn't tend to work?
Well, I think the first step is to help the listener, the audience, whether it's a CEO, a board, cabinet secretary, understand that this risk is real, and that it's not just a risk that they can leave to their IT people. That in fact, cyber risk can have similar impacts to the business bottom line as credit worthiness and other sort of core business factors can have. Mm-hmm. And then I think from there, figuring out how to translate the language of cyber risk to the types, to the sort of the vernacular that executives use when thinking about risk and strategy. Yeah. That is can be hard to do. One of the real challenges I think in cyber risk management is a lack of really good metrics. So, the accountant can come in and show executives a financial statement, and there's hard numbers there. But many people in your audience will appreciate this. Oftentimes, the CISO has a red light, yellow light, green light, chart. Right. And it's a tougher picture to paint for executives. But the more that you can tell a story about how cyber risks can impact sort of core business operations, the more successful you will be, whether again your audience is a board, a CEO, or a regulator, or a cabinet secretary.
Yeah,
I'll just add.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to add two quick thoughts. First, I'll just kind of double down on what Andy said with particular attention to boards. 5 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, many board members that I spoke with in large S&P 500 publicly traded companies were like thought of cyber, which is or cyber risk, as something that really wasn't a board level issue. It belonged to the CISO, to the IT department. Maybe they should hear about it a little bit once a year, but it wasn't really a primary concern for the board. And thankfully, that point of view, I think, is now consigned to the dustbin. And most boards are spending a lot of time thinking about how they ought to govern and oversee cyber risk. They haven't cracked the code. Nobody's figured out exactly how to do it. And for some of the reasons that Andy just pointed to, it's a more complicated problem than some of the set of other standard enterprise risks that people have much more experience working with. And most board members know how to read a balance sheet. Not all of them know how to look at a kind of a really sophisticated CISO report. But the appetite at the level of the board has really changed, which is a really good thing. The second point I wanted to make was just a little bit of a twist from Andy's point about board members like to ask the question, what does good look like?
Yeah.
And how do I know if we're doing good? Or if their English is good, they'll say, how do I know if we're doing well? But what does good look like is
right.
The question. And I kind of think that both the challenge and the inherent interest of what the cybersecurity world is doing is to transform that question from what does good look like to what does getting better look like?
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I have to imagine, I mean, like one of the things that we're constantly, challenged with down at the IT level is, a lot of times the security groups, CISO, whoever, unfortunately kind of gets pigeonholed into this sort of, the department of no or the group of no who are,
Yes.
you're going like, man, I want to innovate. I want to go fast. I want to be doing stuff. And they're going, yeah, but you gotta turn this feature on. You can't do this and you can't. And I have to imagine that there's a similar part of the conversation in which you're talking to people and they're going, well, that's really interesting, but like, I have quarterly goal numbers that we're supposed to meet and we're supposed to see a certain amount of growth. And like, it feels like you're telling me I have to invest in these things over here that are going to, take away from the stuff that moves us forward. And like, there's always that balancing act, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who likes to hear the term tech debt thrown at them, we got to fix this up before we can move forward. At the same point, I really hear you on that, Brian. It's a terrible box to be in when you like the security person, the chief privacy officer, and these folks are there saying, here's the things you can't do. And I know that the very best CISOs are excellent communicators about the value add of what their groups are providing to the company. It's enabling. And increasingly, I think people on the user side, as well as the business side, are starting to understand that good security isn't just like a platform on which you can do the other things that you want to be able to do. It actually is an enabler and an empowerer of those things. And there's a lot of value to be created. But to be honest, I wish there was more value being created in the security space, that there was more competition among big software providers in particular to kind of generate better security as a core feature of their products. And maybe we'll come back and talk about that because that's a market problem. Yeah. The market is asking for enough of this stuff.
Yeah, and we were kind of talking about that briefly before we hit the record button. I'm you brought that up and it was an interesting starting point because on one hand, I feel like I get a press release, I get a request from some group every day of my life that goes, hey, would you love to talk to this security company? There's another security company doing something. And to a certain extent, it does feel like a lot of reinventing a mousetrap. Hey, we're doing this, but we're doing it better. We're doing this, but it's in the cloud. I'm curious, your perspective seems a little bit, like there's not enough innovation or maybe there's not even enough competition. Help me like kind of walk through your perspective on that.
Well, I'll get us started. I think there's more to security than security products, right?
Okay.
And at the end of the day, security products exist to fill some, missing need. And if, products came to market with fewer bugs, with less complexity in terms of configuration, then the need for kind of bolt-on security products would still be there, but you wouldn't see I think the same intensity of activity in the marketplace.
Okay, I'll just add a thought. I mean, I think that the analogy might seem a little bit stretched, but we're living in a world today where people are selling cars without seatbelts. And then sometimes charging the users, hey, you want that seatbelt? It's an optional add-on. When actually, you have to have the seatbelt in order to drive safely. It's not really precise because we don't get into that many car accidents. But if you were getting into car accidents, on a regular basis, the seatbelt wouldn't look so optional. So the idea that the market is sort of structured that, we'll sell you the car and go ahead and drive it. And you pay for your own insurance and you pay for the cost if you get into an accident. Oh, by the way, we have this optional seatbelt we can sell you as well. And there's all these third parties out there that have seatbelts too, but they can't tell you very much about how they actually work, although they have nice ads. And they might not actually be that easy to insert into your car, but because you might have to hire somebody to figure out how to make those things kind of fit into the seat. That's kind of the way the market operates right now. And a little bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think terribly so. And honestly, I think part of what needs to happen here is that users have to be sort of untrained in the belief that this is okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I know, having done product management, there's an aspect of what you do where you're trying to go, look, what's the essence of the problem? I want to build sort of the perfect solution to that problem. And then the reality of the market is you'll go and talk to, your first 40 or 50 companies, and they go, that's pretty good, but I need these 10 other things. And you go, okay, yeah, I can see where you might need that or whatever. And you build those 10 things, and then you go talk to the next 50 or 100, and they go, well, those are nice, but we need these other 10 things. And in the back of your mind, you're kind of going, well, I wouldn't have to build those if you guys would follow best practices, or if you would, so it feels like this sort of constant thing of, do we not really have enough features, or do we have the problem that, like, maybe as an overall community of people, like, we haven't evolved the best practices such that I don't have to create 50 new features, and we don't have, seatbelt add-ons are the only way to get seatbelts. And I don't know. I feel like it's sort of the same trade-off of, like, do I increase more security, or, do I drive more innovation? It feels like the same kind of teeter-totter, if you will. Am I missing kind of where you're going with that?
Well, I'll start there. I put maybe a slightly different twist on it, Brian. I mean, to me, at the highest level, probably the two biggest challenges in the security environment are, you identified one, I'll call it feature creep. And again, the expectations of users that's what digital products are going to do. They're always going to get pushed sort of one feature beyond what's arguably plausible and safe to do. But the second is kind of one of the market consequences of that, which is that we have now in many, many, many parts, or many, many kind of aspects of the enterprise software world, a dangerous tendency towards monoculture.
Okay.
And maybe Andy wants to come in and talk about that, because I know he has really strong feelings about it.
Yeah. And so, monoculture is a term borrowed from biology.
Okay.
And the idea is that in an environment or an organism where there's not much diversity, if a single pathogen comes along, then that entire system is vulnerable at a potentially catastrophic level, right? And there's an analogy to software and to enterprise IT environments where if there's a certain degree of sort of concentration or ubiquity, then vulnerabilities scale, and that's a problem. Now we can ask, why does monoculture emerge? And I think there are a lot of reasons why, but oftentimes it comes down to cost. It comes down to convenience, and in particular, the difficulty of switching to another provider. I'll use Microsoft as an example in the federal government enterprise, where Microsoft provides something like 85% of all productivity software.
Sure.
Switching to another provider would require a massive investment with disruptive effects on users who have to maybe learn a new software suite. CISOs in the federal government really like having just one product to manage as opposed to more than one. It contributes to sort of economies of scale when it comes to IT management. Yep. Yet it carries this monoculture risk, and I think I'll turn it back to Steve here to talk a little bit about competition, but competition is really what is sort of the missing ingredient here. Just to come back to the hot potato analogy, if vendors are incentivized and users are incentivized to invest more in security, then the market will supply more security. Unless and until that happens, we shouldn't expect real fundamental change. But I'll turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit more about competition.
Yeah, look, I'll just come back to the same point. I mean, Andy talked about the switching costs. It's expensive and awkward, and difficult and annoying to consider switching providers from an insecure software package. And all those switching costs are you have to experience right up front when you do it.
Right.
Whereas the security costs that you're paying on an ongoing basis, both in terms of like the risks that Andy talked about before, but also the term of art is opportunity costs. All the things that we don't do, which we could do, but we're afraid to do because we don't have confidence in the security of the platforms on which we're operating. You see that very, very profoundly in the healthcare system today. Like all the things that we would do with healthcare data that could improve the provision and reduce the cost of healthcare, but we won't do it because we don't trust the security of the underlying platforms.
Yeah.
There has to be an incentive to switch to kind of like, how can I put this? Absorb some of those short-term switching costs in order to increase and enhance the long-term value potential of what it is that we're building.
Right.
And the only way to get there, as Andy said, is marketplace competition, which means that unless people really are willing to say and do and act on the statement of like, I'm not going to buy this software anymore, I'm going to move to a different platform and absorb those short-term switching costs, that is because I value the security that additional platform provides. And we get that kind of competition going between providers who are generating better and more secure products, as well as products with more and more and more features at greater and greater scale. Until we get to that, we're going to be kind of, pushing a rock up the hill.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I appreciate the explanation of monoculture. I know we've seen that quite a bit. Obviously, we see certain vendors and even technologies sort of dominate a market, and then sometimes we look at it and we go, how do we actually get here? This hasn't solved a problem. I'm curious to your point of sort of shifting the incentive model. Do you feel like the incentives have to be different? Obviously, as a buying customer, I can be incentivized to say, hey, look, I control my purse strings. I can have influence over the current vendor I have if they're not delivering for me, to sort of say, hey, I have options. I'm going to pick something else, right? That's where the competition aspect comes in. Do you feel like they also, like there's something within any given business that they have to reshift their incentives such that making environments more secure is greater incentivized than, kind of constantly pushing the, hey, we need 5 new features in the mobile application? Is that something you guys have explored? Incentives on both sides, not just the competition angle?
Yeah. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I was going to say, the demand for security has to start from the very top of an organization, because, security is often in competition with more features, with other, investment priorities. And unless leadership sets a really clear tone that, yes, we're an organization that takes security seriously, because if we don't, we're going to fall short of achieving our business or mission objectives. Otherwise, that demand signal is not going to ever be strong enough to move the needle.
I agree with everything Andy said, and I just want to add one other element. One of the ways to get leadership to act that way is to have individuals and users down at the ground level saying, this isn't okay. I'm being asked to bear too much of the burden here. I'm encountering too many requests to patch this or update that, even on my local machine, even though everything's supposed to be managed in the cloud. I've had experience with software packages that seem to be easier to use, and for which the breach history seems to be less problematic. Maybe I want to be able to try those at work. So remember the days when we used to think it was kind of radical and revolutionary to allow people to BYOD to work.
Yeah.
But in effect, what that did was it did put more competitive pressure on enterprises to take users seriously. And I kind of feel like the leadership has to act, but it doesn't mean that the individuals at the bottom of the stack, as it were, can just sit around and wait for that. They can be demanding it too.
Yeah. You guys you're right in the heart of Silicon Valley. I suspect either, people that your neighbors or folks that from social circles, or even some of your students are involved with, kind of the future of what some of these security technologies, do you have some that are sort of top of mind for you that you look at and you go, boy, when this one comes along or when this one matures a little bit, it's really going to, impact and create that competitive situation? Are there things that are, at the top of your watch list at this point from a technology perspective?
So the short answer for me is yes and no. The longer answer is that I am not aware of any silver bullet out there.
Yeah, sure.
And there are lots of really exciting more piecemeal technologies that have the potential to improve security, but none of them are silver bullets. And what I always come back to is yes, and Steve made this point at the top of the program. Technology is important. But technology is implemented by people, used by people, developed by people, deployed by people. And really, most organizations I submit would do best by just going back to by just making sure they're doing just the security basics, right? And so for me, that's things like multi-factor authentication. That's having a plan in place to patch systems in a risk-informed way. Having a mechanism to manage passwords so that users aren't reusing the same password across multiple accounts. They can choose complex passwords and not admin 101. Doing those kind of basic things is still astonishingly less frequent than you might imagine, and extremely powerful when it comes to raising the level of resilience.
Yeah,
great.
We mentioned RSA conference. Like I said, the show will be out right before the conference comes out. I want to ask you guys one last question. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but you're creative folks. If you had a speaking slot or you had a keynote spot at RSA conference and you were like, I need a title, I need a headline, I need a catchphrase that people are going to go, okay, you just open my eyes to something around security, around better security that's just gonna wake them up. Like what might that thing be? What's your sort of go-to tagline these days to get people to go, oh, okay, now you got my attention.
Follow the money.
Andy says follow the money. Okay. I'm going to be more optimistic and say secure digital transformation is the only way out of the coming recession.
Okay,
nice.
Elaborate on that a little. What's the abstract under that one say?
Yeah, so the abstract on that one, Brian, is that look, nobody can predict or as they say, the one thing economists should never predict is the future. So nobody really knows how bad our current downturn is likely to get or how long it's likely to last.
Sure.
But the one thing we know for sure is that we are sitting on top of a big pile of debt that we created to avoid the worst effects of COVID, and probably going to face a bit of a recession going forward as we clean that out. The answer to the only way you kind of escape recessions, or the healthiest way to escape recessions, is by increasing productivity. The single best way to increase productivity is through accelerated digital transformation. We have all the tools we need to do that, as we learned during the recession. But if in doing that, we actually enhance our vulnerability, if we don't actually make that transformation secure from the start, we are going to land in a place where we're going to be in much worse shape 5 years from now than we are right now when it comes to cybersecurity. And the world can't afford it. So this is the opportunity we have to combine sort of like the growth agenda, the exit from recession agenda, the digital transformation agenda, and better security. And now's the time to do it. Like 5 years from now, it's only going to be harder.
Yeah. So we're in a little bit.
I'm sorry.
You're potentially. Yeah. No. It was. I think what I'm hearing you say is, we may get into some sort of dip, which I think is not an earth shattering thing. Folks are seeing what's going on with inflation and potential things. But if some things slow down, that's the perfect time to sort of clean house, get your house in order, if you will, take advantage of the opportunity to make security better, and such that, when things start heating up again, you're not that much farther behind technical debt wise.
Or you might be further ahead. I mean, the one thing, I'm sure we're going to be asking this question, but should we be cost cutting on the security parts of our business during a recessionary environment where we're trying to control expenditures? And the answer is that would border on insane.
Bonkers is the technical term.
Guys, I'm going to wrap up because, I know you have a lot to do, and we're kind of hitting the end of the show. If folks want to, see what you're focused on research-wise, want to engage with you guys, what's the best way to go about doing that?
Andy, go ahead.
Yeah. You can come check out our research at the Stanford Cyber Policy Center at the Freeman Spogli Institute. If you Google Stanford Cyber Policy Center, you will find us at the top of the hit list.
Good stuff. And I'm over at the Berkeley School of Information, and although I've stepped down from my role as director after 7 long, fun years, the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, UC Berkeley, cltc.berkeley.edu.
Good stuff. Yeah, and we'll get that in the show notes for folks that are listening and want to go find it. Guys, thank you very much. I think we probably just sort of scratched the surface of this topic. A lot of tentacles to it, but I really appreciate your insight. It's great to kind of understand where you're coming from, especially with your background, and really appreciate the guidance about how to have these difficult and multi-level conversations. So with that, I want to thank you on behalf of Aaron and I, folks. As always, want to thank the community for listening, for telling a friend, for helping us grow the show. And if you're going to the RSA conference, we'd love to get your feedback on what interests you, the security topics that interest you, and the things that are beyond security as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.